This is the Storypunks podcast, a show where we talk about all the punks. So steampunk, dieselpunk, cyberpunk, and all the other punks. I'm your host, Cindy Grigg. This is episode 11 with Jon Messenger, who has a full-time military career in addition to writing steampunk. We will be talking about his Magic and Machinery series, as well as how he balances his career with storytelling. And he will also talk about how his particular career in the military has informed his steampunk works and his other works. So this is a really cool episode and really expansive, no matter what type of punk-related art you are working on, or maybe you will just find another excellent read. So let me tell you a little bit about what I've been working on before we jump into the interview. I'm in Utah, and we have this beautiful snowfall. Everybody's snowed in, basically. And tomorrow's going to be an amazing ski day and snowboard day, probably. But I am snowed in by my outline. That's the stage I'm at with my work, Peacock Levine and the Ethereal Fates of Naught. And when I mentioned that last week, I've had several people reach out and say, hey, I would love a copy of that outline document. And I've actually offered templates on my site, cindygrigg.com, in the past. So what I'm working on and using right now, and what I showed in the last episode, that's actually an updated version of what I used to offer on cindygrigg.com. So if you've downloaded my resources from there, this will be like an extension or version 2.0 of that. So yes, this week I'll be working on creating a clear or clean and empty template that you can download. So I'll let you know when that's ready if you're interested. Basically, I'll just be nerding out over here. Hopefully you're snowed in somewhere so that it makes you work on your creative projects. But even if you're not, winter in general, just a great time to dig in and to really invest in some of the creative depth of work we need to do to sustain us for the rest of the year. Those are my thoughts on winter, my thoughts on outlining. And if you're interested in beta reading the work in progress I've been talking about, Peacock Levine and the Ethereal Fates of Naught, Regency era, steampunk, and urban fantasy and Norse mythology, then please head to cindygrigg.com, cindygrigg.com. And I've mentioned this in the past, but don't be worried that I am talking about outlining, because I actually do my outlining after I've drafted the most of the work in progress. So I will be ready for beta readers in the coming weeks. So please sign up if you're interested in this story at all. You do not have to read the entire Super Saga, just however much you are interested in. And hopefully you're interested in it all. I welcome readers to do that. And it's a way to read for free. So you can give me minimal input. You can give me maximum input. You can just help me however you'd like, or whatever you have time for. I would love if you would take a look at my work. So again, it's cindygrigg.com, cindygrigg.com. And without further ado, let's get to this interview with Jon Messenger. Jon Messenger, born 1979 in London, England, serves as a United States Army Major in the Medical Service Corps. Since graduating from the University of Southern California in 2002, writing has been a passion. He's an award-winning author of science fiction, steampunk, and paranormal books, and the CEO of Bleeding Ink Publishing, which specializes in publishing speculative fiction. Welcome onto the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So I want to jump right into the questions, because on this show we talk about the punks, and I've already alluded to this, but I would love to hear your take on steampunk. What's in bounds? What's out of bounds? How do you define it?
So it's a really interesting question, just because for me, steampunk was always this Victorian setting with slightly more modernized technology, but everything kind of steam powered. And that's how I always kind of viewed it. The really interesting thing is the more time I've spent in the genre, the more I realize there's absolutely zero definition of what steampunk really is. And I've had everything from, I had someone mark down one of my books because book one didn't involve a train. and they informed me that steampunk always involves a train.
Oh.
And to everything from, I don't know if you've read it or not, I read the Lotus War books.
I haven't read those.
Which is fantastic. It's steampunk in a Japanese setting, which just blew me away. And so, yeah, it really made me realize as we really got into it that this is such a wide open genre.
It really is. And that's why I always lead with that question. It could be a little dangerous on a show to always ask the same question. But I've found that the more we talk around it, the more everybody gives their experience, their interpretation, the more we realize this is tough to define, just exactly like you said. So thank you. Okay, so for anyone who has not yet jumped in with your steampunk series, it's called Magic and Machinery. Can you give us an overview and share what listeners can expect?
Absolutely. So Magic and Machinery is best described as Sherlock Holmes in a world of magic. So it's this world of science, Industrial Revolution era, and all of a sudden the creatures and myths start appearing. So werewolves, vampires, things like that. And what I took from this when I first started coming up with the idea was, how would the world of science react to it? How would we react if all of a sudden vampires and werewolves started showing up? And the answer was simple, is that they shut down their borders. They don't take it very well. They create the Royal Inquisitors to go hunt down magic wherever it appears. And that's what the series is about, is every book is a different investigation where they're hunting down werewolves, vampires, a Frankenstein's monster, things like that. The main character is the Royal Inquisitor named Simon Whitlock. And Simon is very much the Sherlock character. And then he has an apothecary who travels with him named Luther Strong. And Luther is obviously the Holmes-esque character.
Yeah.
But the kicker with this series is that nothing is as it ever appears. And part of my takeaway from writing this series was that I wanted to take all of the tropes and kind of flip them a little bit. And so there's secrets that come out in book 1 about Luther Strong. And then, of course, they meet a werewolf who winds up being not quite as cruel and evil as everyone assumes she would be. And so, yeah, I've always described this series as kind of like my version of Firefly.
Okay.
As the series goes along, they pick up more and more characters until it just gets completely out of hand.
Book 1 is werewolf. Book 2
is vampires.
And then book 3, is it a golem?
It's a Frankenstein's monster.
Oh, okay. But is Gollum in the title? Where am I getting
it?
It
Is. So it's the Gollum of Solomon's Way. And I always refer to it as a Frankenstein's monster just because I find people associate with that better. When I say Gollum, they get all confused and look at me weird.
Totally. That makes sense. And that's a really interesting takeaway for all of us that are creators. Sometimes we're describing our work. And I think what you're doing is really intelligent because you're anchoring your explanation and what people will know depending on your audience. It's a good takeaway.
What I found going to conventions, because I go to a lot of Comic-Cons, mainly because I'm a giant geek and I love Comic-Cons, but if I can also set up a booth there, all the better.
Yeah.
But what I've found is that you have to have that elevator speech. And that's that you're going to get on an elevator with someone and you have about 3 or 4 floors until they're going to get off. And they say, hey, what are your books about? And that's how much time you have. So cram as much information in as quickly as you can.
And make it relatable and understandable. Right. Okay, so you served in, well, actually, before we move on to that, will you tell us about your other series, your other books that aren't steampunk?
So I've got 2 other completed series right now. The first one is a military science fiction series. But like all of my books, I try to take that different angle. So the military science fiction, the different take on that is that it's actually told from the perspective of an alien alliance as they're trying to stop the spread of humanity. And then awesome. I also have a supernatural series that's best described as a contemporary take on Avatar: The Last Airbender. So it's the 4 elements battling it out, trying to either save or destroy humanity.
So cool. Totally awesome. So, and I think there's a lot of crossover there, even though they aren't, steampunk. For people that are interested, I can see the relatability. So that's very cool. Okay. So you serve in the United States Army. And on your site, you make this observation, which I want to read because I think this is really relatable. I'm now an Army major with multiple combat and humanitarian deployments. I've found a balance in my writing between the realism of war, as seen in the Brink of Distinction series he just described, difficulties of post-traumatic stress disorder, as seen in Rage, and the complexities of maintaining relationships, which is prevalent in all my writing, unquote. So did you find similar resonance as you were writing your steampunk works, or was that a different experience?
A little bit of both. So, especially that end part, talking about the difficulties of relationships. One of the things that you definitely see with Simon and Luther is that they're going off on these missions all the time, and they're gone for a month at a time, 2 months at a time. And even in book one, he starts alluding to the fact that there is a girl for him back home, but I mean, you spend an entire book never seeing her. And that's kind of my takeaway of what I've experienced through the military. But on the flip side, one of the things that I did a lot with the science fiction originally, and then with the paranormal, was kind of try to take my experiences from the military and put them into the storyline. What I tried doing with this series, which is a little bit different, is I very much created interesting characters and the terrible things that happen to them. And I'm not nice to my characters at all. But I wanted to build the world around the characters as opposed to what I see a lot, unfortunately, in our genre, which is amazing world building and then trying to figure out where the characters fit into that mythology. I wanted to do it the opposite direction, create really interesting characters with very fascinating storylines, and then make the world fit around them. And I got so tired of the YA genre because every one of them had a love triangle. Every one of them.
The Twilight effect.
Oh, it was. And every one of them, like they'd walk down the street and they'd see the most beautiful person they'd ever seen in their life.
Glittering.
I was like, I'm 38. I've seen beautiful people. I don't run into them on the street on a regular basis. But apparently every like teenager runs into the most beautiful person ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so even though the covers of the books make my characters look very pretty, if you read the write-ups that I have for them, they're not good looking people. And that was part of the write-up was Maddie, even though she's on the cover of book one and she's this gorgeous redhead, she's actually described as very weathered, lined face, leathery skin, because she's been on the elements all the time.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to do with it. I wanted to write flawed characters. And that mentality is really what kind of grew into the series is these characters have some serious flaws. And we're not talking like, they're rude or they're condescending.
Or like the endearing ones, like, oh, I just am so precocious. You know what I mean?
I'm so clumsy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like they all have serious character flaws. And that was the basis of the series that I built this around was these are horribly flawed characters. And the normal person is not going to run into them and be like, I love you. You're the greatest thing ever.
Right.
Like they're going to be like, I really hate your guts.
They're like anti-heroes or whatever. Yeah.
So writing book 4 has been really entertaining because we get to delve into Simon's past. It's been alluded to in the last 3 books, his fear of water and, the fact that he was in jail before he became an inquisitor. And so in book 4, you meet a character from his past who's like, let me tell you about the guy that you keep following around. And you realize like these characters all hate each other, like all of them. And so it's so entertaining to write just because like that's reality. The reality is you don't always like each other and it's totally fine.
Yeah. And you work around it and you've negotiate it all.
Yeah. Luther is stuck now following Simon around. But by the time they get to the point I'm at in book 4, like Luther, if given the choice, would absolutely not be hanging out with Simon.
Yeah.
And so, it's a lot of fun to write.
So, and it's totally open-ended. You could write these for years.
I'm not going to lie. I've got it mapped out for about 13 books right now.
Nice. Okay. That's after my own heart because I'm writing a really long series and every day I doubt it. Like, should I do such a long series? But whatever.
I refuse to be brought down by this. Everyone keeps saying they're like three, maybe 4 books is like that magic number.
Yeah.
And I'm like, screw you. I have a good series to tell. I've got a story that honestly, the way I mapped it out, it doesn't have that dragging lull in the middle of it.
Yeah.
You're going to want to read all 13 books. And screw you hippies. We're going to write this.
I know. I'm writing about Norse mythology. So it's awesome. A saga, literally. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's what drew me to your series is I saw your first cover and it looked kind of, not Norse, but it looked,
right.
It was wintry. Whereas you just don't see that a lot with steampunk. So
yeah,
it was cool.
And I think that's another piece. And we kind of talked about how each book I get to write a totally different style.
Yeah.
And that was the reason that it kind of drew me to creating my own world was if I want to go send them on a mission in a frozen area, like it's my world. All of a sudden there's now a town up there. So let's do this.
Yeah, totally.
before they're going to a swamp. Why? Because that sounds cool. Let's do
Because
that.
that's what you are feeling drawn towards. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's a total luxury. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to branch away from a world that's a little more known. Because not just that, but I'm not going to lie. The paranormal series that I wrote, the supernatural one, is based in modern times, and they go places. They go to London and they go to Portugal and things like that. I had to spend days researching these places to make sure when I described it, someone in that town could pick up the book and be like, "That's totally my city.
This is legit." Yeah.
And it's horrible. Whereas in my own, I could be like, "Oh, there's a library over here. Well, there is now. So fantastic. He's going to the library."
I should ask, as you were answering that, it made me realize I'd thought of this earlier in the interview, but would you call it steampunk mystery, or is it not really a mystery? More of an adventure?
It is. I honestly have difficulty figuring out exactly what genre it fits into, which is why I always just leave it at steampunk, because it is murder mystery. It is paranormal. It is supernatural. It's all over the place.
I think some of the best things are, and I think a lot of stuff in steampunk is that way.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things that I enjoyed about this series was it's written very much. If you've ever seen shows like Bones or something like that, where there's an overarching storyline, but each episode is its own investigation, start to finish. That's kind of what I wanted to write here. But that gives me a lot of leeway because each investigation can be so different. One can be a horror story. One can be the Sherlock Holmes investigation. One can just be this emotional train wreck, which third book legitimately is. But they can be completely different subsets of genres within steampunk because each one is its own investigation. That's one of the reasons I enjoy writing this series.
Oh, that's so cool. That makes me want to write one. I don't have time right now, but
I barely have time for it right now.
Yeah. Well, that actually leads me to my next question. So what advice do you have for people that are balancing military service specifically, along with all of life's other demands and wanting to write?
I'm not going to lie. It's not easy. Just because so many of my author friends are full-time writers and this is what they do all day long. Whereas I have a day job.
Yeah.
And so, and then of course, family obligations and everything else. So what it really boiled down to for me was having the commitment to obligate 1 hour a day to writing. And sometimes sometimes I take my lunch with me to work, and during my lunch break, I'm sitting in front of my computer typing away at a story. Sometimes it's I put the kids to bed, and then while my wife is studying, I'm sitting in the office typing. But if you can do that 1 hour a day, if you're committed to it, it doesn't have to be good work. You can go back and edit it later. But if you're putting words on paper, then the book is eventually going to get published. And if you can't commit the hour a day, or if you can't commit some sort of time, then you can have the best idea in the world and it's never going to wind up being a book.
Oh, that's so good. I've found that myself. I haven't always stuck to it, but the times when I've stuck to it, it really does have that leverage that you need to get stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
So great advice. Okay. On your website, jonmessengerauthor.com, for those listening, you mentioned that you found a cathartic passion in artistic endeavors. And that was a quote from Jon's site. This is going to be a little bit long just to share what's on Jon's site because it's really good, but I'll get to my question, I promise. So Jon, you describe how you tried your hand at painting, and the way you described it, you said, which ended when my moon was fondly compared to a 2-year-old's version of the Death Star. And then you tried woodworking. At which point, again, this is Jon's description, at which point I realized I should not be allowed around power tools before finally settling on writing. And I just love those descriptions, as well as that progression of trying to find your artistic area and what you were going to be artistic in. So because I think a lot of creatives can relate, what was it about the mechanics or experience of writing that finally helped you settle in on that?
I think I tried my hand at so many different things because I knew that the idea of creating was just so exciting for me. And whether it was, being the guy building Legos as a kid or, just being that natural storyteller, the guy that just pseudo class clown, I guess would be the best way to describe it, because I was always getting in trouble for talking during class because I had a story to tell. But it was just the idea of creating. It was the idea of making something unique. And I tried my hand at painting. And sadly, both of those descriptions came directly from my wife. But
Nice.
luckily, painting, I wanted to try my hand at it, and I did, and it was not pretty. And woodworking wasn't terrible, but when you start feeling like you need to wear the chainmail gloves before you start working on anything, you start to realize that not be the right thing for you either. But once you really get the opportunity, for me, it was world building. It was the idea of, and I'm being a writer. Obviously, there comes a part where you're an avid reader as well. And when you read books like Frank Herbert's Dune, and not only has he created this amazing world that he tells about, but he drops so many casual references to things that have happened over hundreds of years of history leading up to it. And I don't think I fully appreciated it until his son started picking up and writing the prequel trilogies based entirely off of his notes, that he had pages and pages and documents and books full of notes about the history of this world that he created that had almost zero impact on what he actually wrote when he wrote Dune. But he knew that in order to make it powerful, in order to make it a world that you could really just get enveloped in, it had to have a history. It had to have its own mythology. There had to be rules and physics and everything else. And he made it. He created it. And that was so amazing to me. The idea of sitting down and creating this world, making it unique in your own. And when I started working on Magic and Machinery, I had the option. Believe it or not, it actually started off as a sci-fi series.
I could see that. Yeah.
But I had considered basing it in reality. I mean, based it in Victorian England, where all of a sudden these creatures and myths started appearing. But then I realized I had this unique opportunity, and this is what really drew me to writing, to make my own world. Like start to finish, the rules and physics and magic and everything else are uniquely mine. And that's why I fell in love with the idea of it.
That's so cool. Well, I think you have a really well-rounded take, because you started out telling us about your focus on characters, but obviously world building is at the heart of your writing too. And I think those are huge elements. Obviously, everyone knows that, right? So very good. Well, I have a question from Twitter. So user @ArcadeRhetoric asks, Jon, what growth would you like to see in this genre? And the way when I responded and said that I would love to add this question, Arcade Rhetoric elaborated, thanks, Cindy. It's just that steampunk, at least in the mainstream, has mainly been defined by its aesthetic and not its unique story themes. I'm curious about what place those narrative themes will hold in the future, because they are more relevant now than ever. So we'll start with the first part of this question, where Arcade Rhetoric asks, what growth would you like to see in this genre?
I honestly think that one of the points of steampunk that make it so pleasing and so appealing to so many people is the aesthetic of it. And I feel like we've started scraping the surface a little bit with shows like Penny Dreadful and things like that, The Alienist. But it's so juvenilely developed when it comes to television and movies and things like that. I would love to see a good steampunk series developed. And I think that would really explode the genre for us, because visually it's incredible. Walking out and seeing the sky filled with zeppelins and seeing all this technology, there's such potential there. And I think that people are hesitant because it's a relatively new genre. But I honestly think that once people realize the visuals of the genre, that they would fall in love with it just like we have.
Yeah. And I think I totally agree with your assessment that we need that blockbuster thing. Maybe we don't need it, but it would certainly advance it as far as, being in the mainstream. But maybe it's fine that it's not in the mainstream. I hear different things from different creators and different, fans. But I do think that aesthetic, maybe it's expensive to create, right? Because it's all CGI. Yeah. But okay, so the second part of this, where Arcade Rhetoric pointed out that, and I think a lot of people feel this way, that steampunk has unique story themes. Have any stood out to you?
I hate to go back to what I already talked about, but to me, some of the steampunk that I've read has been very much based on aesthetics. Like the whole story is based around what the world of steampunk is, as opposed to the storyline itself. And then we kind of talked about that earlier. Some of the stories that I've read, to include the Lotus War, like we talked about earlier, the Japanese theme, is this amazing amalgamation between steampunk and mythology, and ways of incorporating mythology that we understand from fantasy and other paranormal stories, and seamlessly just melding it into the steampunk world. And I think that aesthetic is brilliant. And that, for me, that's what's always appealed to me, is not just, can you create this unique world, but can you create a unique world that has enough of a familiarity that anyone can pick up the book and be immersed in the world, in the steampunk world, but at the same time understand the tropes that we're talking about.
Oh, that's so cool. So I was recently at a convention where there was this whole panel on retelling. So it was all about different ways people are taking, really well-known stories or mythologies, like you're talking about, and doing retellings and the art of that. And it was really interesting for me to think, I'm sitting there as someone writing steampunk and some of the other punks, and I was thinking, well, these genres, because they are so aesthetically based, they are perfect for retellings. And we've seen a lot of that, right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, when I heard Arcade Rhetoric's question, I agree with you. I think along those lines as well. And I think the themes are different depending on the work, obviously. But yeah, there's so many ways that we can take it beyond aesthetic, like you're saying. So.
Right. And so much of it has to be, do you have the characters that can sustain such a unique world? Do you have that unique storyline, or is it just you get on a Zeppelin and it's beautiful scenery? I mean,
yeah. Doubt it. How are you going to carry off a really significant theme or storyline?
And I think one of the things that I try to do with my series, I always refer to it as steampunk light, because I've read some steampunk that gets very, very deep into the science behind it. But I think for the casual reader picking up steampunk for the first time, I think you have to assume that that the reader is going to understand what you're talking about. Even if the technology is totally foreign to them, saying that a Zeppelin is flying through the air is totally fine without delving into the science behind how it happens or what led to that point of the story. And that's why if it's character driven, if the story's character driven and they're interacting with the world, I think you can really leave out a lot of the heavy-handed steampunk aspects and really just say, this is the world they're in. We have a little bit of suspended disbelief whenever you're reading.
Yeah. Have you had a lot of feedback? I'm going off script here, so we can always cut this, but have you had a lot of feedback on what most readers respond to as far as heavy steampunk versus steampunk light, like you're talking about?
It's interesting going to conventions, because I have this theory called the mall kiosk rules, where if you're walking past my booth and you make eye contact or you look at the books just a little too long, at that point you're committed to hearing my spiel. And so I've literally stopped people as they walk by and be like, nope, come on, you're done, come here. And what I've found is there's a much bigger market for steampunk than what I realized. Magic and Machinery has been my best-selling series at every convention I've been to. And a lot of it starts off with me saying, this is a steampunk series, and automatically I've seen a lot of eyes light up. I think there's a lot more interest there than what I ever believed true. But then it boils down to that elevator speech. And for me, it's when I say Sherlock Holmes in a world of magic, you have that amalgamation. You have the Sherlock Holmes, which is that Victorian, which easily fits into the steampunk genre. And then a world of magic. And as soon as I start describing werewolves and vampires, it's that fascination that happens there.
That's really cool. And again, it sounds like you're just a master of saying things that people know to anchor them in this unique world that you've created from those parts. That's awesome.
I'd be lying if I was saying that this wasn't sculpted over like 4 years.
Okay, that's encouraging too, because sometimes, we're in our writing lair and it's terrifying to talk elevator speeches and stuff, but
it's you start off and everything you say feels heavy-handed. And then eventually you start whittling it down. And I'm not going to lie, it was actually one of my friends that was like, this is kind of like a Sherlock Holmes story, but you have magic in it. And I'm like, brilliant. You are brilliant.
Yeah, totally. Totally. That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, I am totally fascinated. And I know that a lot of our readers or listeners or watchers or however people are accessing this interview, I know that they will want to know more where they can find you. So where would you like to point them to?
I would say that I've got an author page on Facebook. You can search for Jon Messenger author and find me there. And you can find me on Twitter as well. It's Jon.Messenger. And then, of course, the website, jonmessengerauthor.com. All three of those are good ways to get in touch with me. And of course, I try to be as responsive as possible if you send me a note.
Oh, so good. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for meeting with me, taking time out of your Saturday, because it just totally made my day. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm so glad I did it.
It's always inspiring to see someone who has done so much with the constraints of time on his plate. And Jon is very inspiring about that. So open and so willing to share what he has learned, and I really appreciated the time. So just as a reminder, if you're interested in beta reading the work in progress I talked about when I was rambling about my outline before this episode, that is up and coming. So I will be offering the first saga in my super saga. So the first fifth of the saga that will be ready in the upcoming weeks. So I'm really excited to start sending that out to anyone who can give me feedback. You can be a detailed beta reader, or you can just, read it through, send me a paragraph. So either way, it's a way to read for free and to help me out. I would absolutely love that. Especially if you're listening to this podcast, it means you are pre-qualified, you're into this, and I would love to know what you think. So you can find that at cindygrigg.com, CINDYGRIGG.com. And as ever, please feel free to take a few minutes, leave a review on iTunes or whichever podcast catcher you are listening to this on, or feel free to subscribe. And you can also leave comments on YouTube or elsewhere. So it's wonderful to have you here. Good luck with all your projects, and I will talk with you next week.